Well, welcome to this new installment of my Aletheia Dialogues with whistleblowers. Now, as far as I know, I don't think my guest has ever been described as a whistleblower or self-identifies as such, but he certainly fits the profile of our preferred term of witness bearer, someone who bears witness to great emergent truths and tries to communicate these to an unknowing society, especially truths about the greatest challenges facing the human species on planet Earth and how we need to rediscover ourselves in nature. Dr. Ian McCallum, psychiatrist, poet, Jungian analyst, wilderness guide, and Springbok rugby fullback. Let's not forget that. He has, with a close friend, Ian Michler, just published a book titled Living in Two Worlds, Addressing Humanities Greatest Challenge. I happen to be in Cape Town, where he lives, and staying with a friend of mine. She had just bought the book and I found it lying around. I'm going to get my own copy now and make sure it takes its place on my bookshelf alongside Ian's other classic book, Ecological Intelligence, Rediscovering Ourselves in Nature, which was published in 2005. I thought also I could not leave Cape Town before sitting Ian down to again reflect on his journeys. I say it again because in the link now appearing above is a conversation that another friend of mine, Leslie Shuttleworth, and myself had with Ian 2.5 years ago. It was recorded 6 months into the COVID-19 lockdown, and we reflected together on what it was saying to us as a human species, what message was inherent in it, and how we could learn the lessons on offer. And I would strongly suggest that if you haven't watched it, hit the pause button now, click on the link, put your phone on silent, and enter into that conversation.
Have we forgotten that wilderness is not a place, but a pattern of soul, where every bird and beast and tree is a soul maker? Have we forgotten that wilderness is not a place, but a season, and we are in its final hour?
In 2012, following ancient elephant migratory routes and clusters, my great and close friend Ian Michler and I undertook a 5,000-kilometer journey through 6 southern African countries. The objectives of our adventure were many, but for me the most important was this: if we cannot look after or understand an animal this big, how on earth are we going to look after the little things? And so, with the support of a solid backup team, we walked and we cycled and we kayaked across southern Africa. And when it was over, I came away with a greater understanding of the meaning of the word keystone. Keystone species, creatures that are essential for maintaining the integrity of ecosystems. A keystone is a wedge-shaped stone in an arch. Remove that stone and the entire arch collapses. Elephants are keystone species. So are bees, so are termites, so are beetles.
The big question, of course, then was human beings. Are we a keystone species? Well, you know what the answer is to that. It is a profound no. We are not a keystone species. That if we had to disappear tonight, that nothing would miss us, actually. And I centered this around the notion of keystone individuals. Well, not a keystone species. What about keystone individuals? Mm-hmm. And could this, in fact, be part of our evolution as a species? Could it be? Well, it might be the only chance we've got. Do you have it in you to be a keystone individual? Somebody who makes a difference to not just to your life, but the life of other living things. And out of this, one of the great requirements of a keystone individual is to be ecologically literate.
As you were talking, Ian, I was thinking of a beautiful poem, and the last line is that the brave and startling truth is that we are the ones we've been waiting for. But then I also recently have been reading a lot of the work of Bayo Akomolofe. He talks about becoming fugitive. And at first I really reacted to that and thought, no, you can't just go and hide and find a safe place. But I think he's talking about something more profound, about finding the other people that are fugitive from what's going on and going deeper into yourself and into what is happening. And then I watched something else where he was talking about you have to do both. You have to be fugitive from our destructive and brutalizing culture, and I use that word deliberately, but you also have to do the work that needs doing.
Okay, welcome back. I'm joined by my host who's come to help me, my long-standing friend Nolene Dunn, and she might want to interfere every now and again to put us right. Ian, I don't think we've spoken since that interview 2.5 years ago. Before we get into the book, let's start by catching up. What's been happening in your life in the last 2.5 years?
Well, as you know, 2 years goes by pretty quickly, and really what has dominated my life is pretty much what has dominated the lives of most other individuals, and that has been the whole COVID pandemic. And this has been quite a lesson, I think, for a lot of us regarding the potency of microorganisms, the influence which they have on human lives. But I think also it's been a time when we've had an opportunity to see what happens when human beings cut down their consumption, as they did in the early days, stay at home for a little while, and I realize that I'm fully aware of the fact that there are a lot of challenges to what we had to go through. But when you think about people seeing the Himalayas from 250 kilometers away for the first time in their lives, people living in northern India, people in Beijing seeing the stars for the first time due to lockdown, a reminder that there is this other world out there. And then, of course, the big question is, what does it mean to go back to the way that we used to live? Redefining the meaning of normal. And right now, I think we're busy still grappling with that particular question. What's been happening to me has been happening to a lot of other people. But this is not about addressing the COVID pandemic on its own. This is about maybe looking at what we need to be doing in the years to come. Why? Because we are going to be faced with other microbial challenges, very, very much like the COVID ones. So the big question is, are we going to be ready for it? Will we handle it differently? These are some of the challenges.
That article that you wrote, which I see is in your book, I Can't Breathe.
Yes.
And how you so beautifully wove the metaphor of breath as a sort of a deeper root metaphor for our planet. Our planet's being stifled. Any more poems that you've written? Any more deeper insights?
The easiest one to address is the poetry. Yes, I wrote a poem on the early days of COVID called An Unfamiliar Silence. But I think for the rest of it, one of the overriding feelings which I had regarding the reaction to COVID was that this was not what was described as a black swan event. In other words, this was not an event which just took us all by surprise. I have a strong sensing of the way that we have been living in the increasingly, and let's just take, for example, in the last 10 years, something had to give. There just seemed to be sort of increasing global uncertainties. There was an increasing rise in the right-wing political movements, refugees on the up. Just a sense that something has actually got to give. And the timing of this COVID virus in 2019 to begin with, I think was a trigger that that the world was in a way waiting for. How we dealt with it is fascinating, because I don't believe we'll deal with it the same way again. Right. I want to be very clear here that the massive global lockdown was, for me, primarily based on the sense that something had to give, and this is what we were dealing with. The way that we went about it, I think, was certainly necessary. Why? Because the hospital services just weren't ready for what we were going to have to be dealing with. It's easy to speak in hindsight, but there were a lot of individuals early on who, I think quite rightly, were pointing to the fact that wait a minute, this particular condition is a virulent condition, but it's not necessarily fatal. People do die, but we all die of something, some way, sometime. The deaths due to COVID way down the hit parade of causes of death worldwide. It can't hold a match or candle to malaria, to tuberculosis, to malnutrition, it can't do that. But be it as it may, it's sharpened up the hospital services in a big way, so that I think we would be far better equipped to deal with this, any future challenges differently to what we had before. So yes, it's been a learning curve there, but uncertainty prevails. That's just the way it is. But having said that, for me, uncertainty, when I say for me, I would agree with those who have already written about this, that uncertainty is a driving force of evolution. It's if we lived our lives with certainty, think about that would mean everything would be utterly predictable, and life doesn't work that way.
I was astonished, and also realized that, well, let's use that COVID thing to try and incubate something new. And I met people around the world, like with Leslie Shuttleworth and that thing, and another extraordinary guy, Sohail Inyatullah, who was a futurist, and he had these scenarios, and he talked about the needed pause, and how can we then learn the lessons that are on offer. Now, it seems like you were quite productive in the COVID thing, and you finally got this book done. So, Living in Two Worlds, Addressing Humanities Greatest Challenge. I can recall being really intrigued about the expedition when you and Ian Michler talked about it when we were at that Wilderness of Leadership conference way back in 2009. And you were still, I think, incubating this idea. And I recall that at that stage there was this raging debate at the time around whether to cull or not to cull elephants in the Kruger Park. Ecologists were sharply divided on the matter. On the one hand, elephant populations had grown to the point that many felt the park was at risk of deforestation, desertification, because nature couldn't sustain the regrowth of the trees that the elephants had uprooted and fed from. Others argued that in fact the uprooting and disturbance was essential for the health of the planet. And it was really a question of what about the human species? Fencing that had now happened, creating a boundary that was a barrier between ourselves as a human species and nature. And I just love the idea that you and Ian had, where you said, well, it's about the corridors, it's about the migratory routes of elephants. And then you also, as a way you do with your deep Jungian insight, what about the corridors of our mind and how to open up new ways and new neural pathways to think differently? Now that really intrigued me. I don't know if you recall that. So it's really such a joy to actually see you now, 10 years after that trip, finally getting this package. Now give us a short overview of what the book's about. Don't tell them too much because I want people to buy it.
Okay, well, first of all, it's important just to stress that this is a dual authorship. Ian Michler, who has been a prominent activist, environmental journalist for a number of years now, man of immense courage and and intelligence. He does the hard yards. Been a long-standing friend, and so for the two of us to team up, first of all, in doing this Tracks of Giants expedition, which we did in 2012. That's part of the book, by the way. That's part of the first section of the book, which is a shorter section in the second section, which is really serving as the initial idea was to undertake this journey, and as you quite rightly say, was to promote the importance of corridor conservation, which was already very much an ongoing and early phenomenon, by the way, through the Peace Parks Foundation. And there are others in Africa where those corridors also exist, but through political pressures, they are precarious. Okay, we wanted to continue promoting this whole notion of corridor conservation, and the reason why is that if animals are permitted to move along ancient migration routes through these corridors, clearly it's going to strengthen the gene pool. If you have animals confined to any one place, then something's got to give, ultimately. It comes back to the whole question of the culling. That's a whole debate in its own right. My feeling, just by the way, is that I can understand culling. If you have animals enclosed in a managed area, that is the key word. It's a managed area. It's not a wild area. Then we have to do what we can to take care of the remainder of the vegetation upon which these particular animals depend. Now, having said that, where the counter argument to this goes, and it's understandable, but it's not immediately acceptable for all of us, and that is that these are cycles of animals coming and going, vegetation areas coming and going, are cycles that exist and function way beyond your and my lifetime. For example, if you take something like elephants, for example, elephants, for a start, do have a massive impact on the vegetation, particularly the woodland vegetations. Well, in time, those woodland vegetations then give way to grasslands. The elephants disappear. The grassland animals, the zebra and the buffalo, they move in. Meanwhile, the old seeds through the droppings from the trees, the seeds from the droppings of elephants, then take root, and over many years they grow again. The grasses get usurped by the trees, and the elephants come back. See, this all takes place over decades, and we're an impatient species. So, what we're really looking at over here, and excuse me if I'm drifting off the point of your question, is that the care of wildlife areas worldwide is going to be permanent. I don't think there'll ever be a time when we can say, right, guys, at last we've got the corridors going, we've got the animals thriving, we can just now back off and let them do what they have to do. I don't think that's ever going to happen. All right. Why? For obvious reasons. One of them being the constant rise in human population, human needs, and so that these demarcations between wildlife areas and human habitation, these are going to continue to coexist, and that is why, if you look at the cover of the book, this is a picture which was taken in Uganda, and I was with Ian when that picture was taken. There you have agricultural land right up to wildland. If you go to Malawi today, if you go to Majete Game Reserve or Lwandi Game Reserve in the southern sections, these are wonderful reserves there. But when you come up to where the reserve ends, that's what it looks like. It's forested in one section and it is bare on the other. Given half a chance, people are going to move into the reserves, make the most of not just trees, but even fallen trees. And then you ask yourself, well, what's the problem with fallen trees? Well, fallen trees are the homes of countless insects, fungal forms, which are then a part of the nutrients of the soil. So where are we going to with this kind of thinking? Well, the answer is, who the hell knows? Okay, but we have to do our work.
When you talked about that idea that you and Ian Michler had in 2009, I have to confess I was rather hoping I would crack an invitation, because I couldn't have imagined anything more romantic, shall we say. The thought of, well, what do the elephants have to say? You know, because I remember in your first book you talk about how every species, there's both a literal and a sort of a metaphysical, symbolic meaning. And I've always been intrigued by that idea. So what about the elephants within us? But then when I read the book and I saw it, I think I was rather grateful that you left me behind. Unless you had brought my cardiologist and the whole backup medical team along, I don't think I would have made it. 5,000 kilometers, how many? 6 countries, 3.5 months.
4.5.
4.5
months.
I'd reflect on that experience.
Who wouldn't want to say yes to the possibility of an adventure like the one we took? It's just something that was certainly right up my street, and Ian was very, very much available to be part of it, bearing in mind it was his idea in the first place. Is that we initially started off with a notion, and this is Ian saying, how about we follow elephants through Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. We do a circular trip. So at that time we were working together in the northern Botswana in the beautiful Nyanti region, and it just sounded like such a good idea. And when we tried to get the thing going, to get a sort of a better feel of what was really needed, it became clear that to do a little circular trip like that would be very limited compared with doing one which would recognize the role of elephants right across southern Africa. So it was on that basis that we got really excited about following elephant migration routes from the west coast to the east. And it didn't take too long to realize that those elephant migration routes no longer exist. If there's any kind of migration route that's active at the moment, it's a rather precarious link between Botswana and the Chobe National Park in Zimbabwe, and an even more precarious between Botswana and Zambia. So having said that, you have Peace Park's backed project called the Kaza Initiative, which is including Angola, Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Botswana in an area around the Zambezi River, which will allow elephants to move. And let's just see how that develops, because it's been on the cards now for quite a long time. It's been considerable development, but I'm not in any position, just through ignorance actually, to be able to say to you that this thing is really, really working at the moment. So what do we got here? We've got no elephant migration routes. Well, what do we have? Well, this is where Rudy van Aarde and his studies of elephants was the one who drew attention to the naming of elephant clusters. You have elephant cluster groups in different countries. So that's what we did. We went along and identified some of the clusters, you know. And really, having said that, just what became increasingly clear, even though we were able to speak about this, that what we were looking at here in terms of wildlife, and I hate the word wildlife management, but wildlife existence, was not just an animal problem or animal tragedy as to what's been happening with the fate of wild animals, but a human animal tragedy. Where that really struck home was when we were in eastern Namibia, when we saw what had happened to the Bushmen. You know, I mean, it's one thing to when I speak for myself here, there's that sense of an inner Bushman. What is that? That is the old hunter-gatherer. It's in our genes. You know, these are ways of existing prior to the onset of agriculture 10,000 years ago. Okay, and I think there's a nostalgia for a simple way of life which somehow and unashamedly romantically linked to old hunter-gatherer tribes like the Bushmen and the Aborigines. And these are threatened ways of lives. In fact, they're threatened is probably putting it mildly. They're probably extinct. All right. The fact of the matter is that you come in Namibia, traditional Bushman ways of life no longer exists. That's it. You know, there are memories, there are stories, there are shows which are put on for the benefit of tourists, but it's all about this is how things used to be. What comes out of here naturally here is that the future of wildlife, the way we know it, is no different to the future of human societies, the way that they have been known. Yeah, there are differences, obviously, but it's the same kind of phenomenon. And the big question arises, how the hell did we get ourselves into this kind of position? And if we can recognize what this is about, what is it that we can actually do to enhance a deeper sense of coexistence with living things? The whole field of what James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis referred to back in the 1980s, by the way, as recognizing the world, the earth, as a living organism, is becoming increasingly real, increasingly practical, and even if there are individuals who challenge the science, it's nevertheless still a damn good idea. It's a hell of an important attitude to adopt, to be able to see that whatever living form that exists out here is a center of experience in its own way, that it is linked to you and me on a deep biological level through aspects of our DNA. I mean, I don't have to go into any of the details here. But biological life is biological life, whether you're a human, whether you're a cockroach, whether you're a tree. This is biological life, and we coexist. We actually need each other.
Which is an idea that goes all the way back, I've discovered, to Pythagoras. I've been watching a video of a conversation between a neuropsychiatrist, you might know him, Dr Ian McCallum, who's there's a fascinating, he just published a whole new book on the whole idea of the dual hemisphere of the brain, the hypothesis, and debunked the debunkers, and has come up with an extraordinary solid research of 1,300 pages. His brother is an art historian who lives in an Aegean island and is fascinated with classical antiquities of the ancient Greeks. And he's written a book called When the Dog Speaks, the Philosopher Listens. And he's referring to this incident where apparently Pythagoras was walking in the marketplace and somebody was beating his dog. And he stopped him. He says, "Stop beating your dog. I can hear the voice of a dead relative and friend of mine." Because he happened to be walking his own dog in this beautiful Aegean island. And he said, "I've got to write this book." So he's looked into the history of Pythagoras. Now, he predated Plato and Aristotle and all the rest. And what I found so fascinating, most of us only know about Pythagoras' theorem. You know, that the area of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the area of the other two sides. Now, we always talk about thinking outside the box. It's actually really quite a leap of thinking to actually look at these three sides and thinking of A, B, and C, and to suddenly have this intuition that they are related by the area of the three sides and squares, the boxes around it. So he takes that as another, almost like a metaphorical thing, and saying, which I just love your thing, is we need to not just keep thinking outside the box as if we're a human species that's living on the planet. We are part and parcel of this creation. We have to start thinking inside the box, recovering some of that ancient wisdom.
So, yeah, I mean, Pythagoras is also known for a beautiful quote, which is, "All things are intelligence." Now, it doesn't mean to say all things have human intelligence, which I think is also questionable. I mean, intelligence, surely, by definition, is the capacity to learn from your mistakes, or to adjust, or to adapt. But don't tell me that plants and other animals haven't learned this along the way. They have an intelligence of their own. And there's a lovely aside, which comes from this, is that we have this search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Well, apparently it's been shown that there is extraterrestrial intelligence. And the reason why is that nobody's contacted us.
They've written us off.
Yeah,
Don't go there.
Okay. So I think this is one thing about the human species, and for which I will take I salute, and that's our sense of humor,
Yeah.
Which, by the way, laughter is once beautifully described as a staggered scream. Is that you come to a realization or a situation when there's nothing left to do but scream, but that's not going to help, so you might let's turn it into some kind of humor.
Well, the interesting thing is with Ian McCallum, in fact, I'm going to put up the link to this conversation he had with, of all people, John Cleese. John Cleese, how do you pronounce it? And the two of them talk about the value of humor and how, particularly because Ian's, isn't it interesting that all these great people are named Ian? There's Ian Player, Ian McCallum, Ian. But Ian has this incredible sense that part of our problem in this world today is that we are acting in our management and organization and sort of governance systems overwhelmingly from the left brain, from the left hemisphere, and have lost the connection with the holistic thinking of the right hemisphere. He really has, looking at stroke patients and all the rest, and I just think I would love to see a conversation with you and him as psychiatrists who've also understood, and have gone through a very much more eclectic polymath approach to truth, science, poetry, mysticism, all that.
Yeah, I think first of all, the notions of the left brain, right brain, when it was first shown to be provable, measurable, it was something that was so important for us to recognize. At the same time, it's now a little less fashionable. And the reason for this is simply because the one can't, strictly speaking, do without the other. That there's neuroplasticity which will allow somebody with a left-sided brain damage, provided it is not that far advanced, to compensate for this on a right brain adaptation to what's going on. So it's dynamic, and I think that this is a lovely way to look at it. We've got to see a lot of our language continues to be sort of dualistic. All right. So the question is, how do you then deal with that? Well, you deal with this on the notions of living in two worlds. You've got to understand left and right brain thinking. All right. But then they are separate, but they're the two sides of the same coin. We've got to learn how to live in these two worlds of that which is objective and that which is subjective. In a world which warms to the arts and thrills to the world of science. Subject and object. Okay.
Well, I can see that you and Ian McCallum would have a lovely time together talking about it, because you're a wonderful exponent of somebody who has basically recognized the necessity of a holistic view that integrates rather than this reductionist tendency to kind of fragment.
It's okay to reduce. It's the whole basis of science. You have a thesis, all right? You then have an antithesis, or an antithesis, if you like, which is fantastic. Well, let's see its opposites, okay? And let's take it apart. But for God's sake, don't forget synthesis. You put it together again. The secret of an orange is not in the pip. It's the whole.
That's right.
It is the whole fruit in itself, and it's the dynamism of holistic thinking, I think, which is so critical. We desperately in need of a language that can best convey, or better convey, what it is that we really feel about our coexistence and how the world works, how the biosphere works.
Well, and in so doing, we become keystone individuals. Now, that was the other big takeaway from our conversation 2.5 years ago, where you made the point that there are keystone species like the elephants, like bees, and that the human species is not a keystone species in as much as the biosphere does not depend on us for its survival, but that we can become keystone individuals. Now, just to catch you up on what I've been doing in the last 2.5 years, is I found myself, after that conversation with you, sucked into this virtually vacant niche of providing psychosocial support to whistleblowers. And it dawned on me this morning as I was preparing for this that these folk that I'm working with, and we've got a support group of about 30 or so of them. These are the people that testified at Zonda and all the rest, who get suffering severe retaliation, that they are actually keystone individuals in their context,
yes,
because they have tried to bring things together. The difficulty they have is that you and I kind of signed up for activism. They didn't. They just came to work one day and saw this wrongdoing and challenged it, and then found themselves literally the stones which the builders have rejected. And I keep trying to reassure them that they will become the keystones. What words and thoughts do you have from your experience as a psychiatrist, as a therapist, as somebody who's heard the stories of people going through life traumas and that we can distill from that, because this is really made for their benefit?
Well, I think, first of all, the notions of a keystone individual, it has a sense of an automatic challenge to it, to be a keystone individual. And this is where I also value the importance of language, is that, remember, we're not talking about keystone collectives. We're talking about keystone individuals. And what we have to be careful of here is confusing individuality with individualism. And a lot of our thinking, particularly Western thinking, our economy is about individualism. That I'm okay, I'll sort myself out, I'll do what I have to do, I say what I need to say. Okay? Individuality is very different. That your individuality is a personal sense of agency, a personal sense of what it is that I stand for, a personal ethic, all right, and recognizing that individuality feeds into relationships. Why? Because who you are and what you are is impossible to define outside of your relationships. But you are conscious of your individual contribution towards that relationship. And this is not just your relationships with human beings. It's vital, yes. But it's your relationship to animals, to forests, to the sky, God's sake, to the elements that sustain us. It is a deep sense of reciprocity with other living things, and also a sense of respect. Okay, so that individuality is crucial, because it is a reminder of individual variations, individual voices. That individual diversity is just as important as biodiversity, is just as important as social diversities. Let's understand that. And the beauty of this, in a way, is the beauty of paradox, is that you and I are at any one time individuals, and I want to focus on individuality, but we live in a world of relationships. That's another way of understanding the concept of living in two worlds. I live the life that is meaningful to me, but I would like to live it in a way that is meaningful to others as well. That is living in the two worlds. It is the, as I say, it is the beauty of a paradox. So keystone individuals sounds really great, but I would say that the hallmark of a keystone individual is surely summed up in that word conscience. All right, and without, if you look at the evolution towards a human conscience, our lives have gone through, or animal lives have gone through phases of being amoral. A crocodile's amoral. You know, there's no right or wrong. It does what it has to do, you know. It just is what it is. It's territorial. It's everything that goes with being reptilian. The beginnings of social species, and more especially human species, is that there had to be rules and regulations. And those rules and regulations fed into what we understand as moral systems. They are judgmental systems. Now, this is right, that is wrong. This is good, that is bad. You then have another shift, which I think is underestimated. Again, why? Again, because we don't have the right words for it. And that is what I would call ethics. All right. Which is different to morality. Ethics, as my old friend George Ellis said, is something you discover for yourself. And when you discover for yourself that this is good or not good, and it doesn't comply with what I was brought up with, that takes a hell of a stand. So, yeah, your keystone individuals in terms of the whistleblowers, that is the shift between somebody working within a system of obedience, of rules and regulations, and then finding out something for himself, which is, no, don't do that. And that comes from the core of that individual. And that is a significant leap in consciousness, as far as I'm concerned, as that individual is able to make a stand on the basis of an ethical stand. I don't do this. And you know what? It's a lovely quote from Plato's Phaedrus, which features in a book which was instrumental in an early change in ways of thinking for me, was the old Robert Persick's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. All right. There's just a quote at the beginning, and if you understand that quote, you'll understand this book. And it's a question which is put to the Phaedrus, who's this oracle. And tell me, Phaedrus, what is good and what is not good? And Phaedrus' answer is it necessary that any man should say? Do you mean to tell me that you don't know the difference between what is good and what is not good? That you don't know a good conversation when you're in it, or one that's not good? That the quality of the shirt which I'm wearing is a good quality, not a bad quality, or it's not good? You don't know the difference? Come on. That is the fuse, if you like, into understanding ethics. Is that sort of a deeper recognition of this is not good, and therefore something needs to happen here.
Well, what we call this the Aletheia Dialogues, and the genesis of that word is Aletheia is the Greek word, which is often translated mostly as truth. But I then discovered that a better translation is the word reality. And I then found myself looking into Plato's allegory of the cave, and this idea of how people who were in this cave and only seeing figments and images on the wall from a light, and one person emerges from the cave, sees a real tree, and he talks, interesting, it's all about biological forms, a real tree, a real bush, a real dog, and then comes back into the cave, and people can't see it. And what then happens? Well, then they get scapegoated. How do we help society to emerge from its cave? How do we bring this out? So that's why I love the idea of ecological intelligence as so much part of that. And one of the thoughts we'd want to do is actually have a group of whistleblowers be taken on a wilderness trail. And Simon Blackburn and I are exploring it. They really are suffering. I mean, they really are. The retaliation against them, the weaponized use of disciplinary procedures against them. I mean, you've had assassinations. Because how can I bring together my experience working as an environmentalist and consciousness around that into now helping these folk find their
individuality
and be absorbed as individuals back into society, because society doesn't want them. What can we do to actually give them hope?
It has to be exactly what you are speaking about, and that is that their work has been recognized, that these are your people who stand by you. It's lonely. It's a lonely life, but you're not alone. Okay? And there's another way of looking at this, that sometimes you might feel utterly alone, but you're not lonely. Why? Because the other things which are that sustain you. It is an incredibly difficult task, and I'm sorry to have to say this. When I say sorry, this is one of the realities. There is that in time, what they have done distills through into the thinking of younger generations. What the whistleblower has done is had the courage to rock the boat. You know, he's had the courage to speak up and say, "Listen, the emperor is not wearing new clothes." We all know that. It is an ancient dynamic. I mean, you might remember, for example, that movie called Terms of Engagement, where a United States Army officer is facing court-martial because of giving an instruction to his soldiers to open fire on a group of Arabs who were about to assassinate an American ambassador. All right, this is the scenario, okay, and it's important. And when they came into the inquiries, the CCTV cameras had all disappeared. There was no evidence. This became a political decision to have this guy scapegoated. The wife of the ambassador comes to him and says to him, "Look, I know that you saved my husband's life, okay? But do not ask me to go into the witness box because I will refuse." You know. Why? Because my husband's job's at stake, because my children's lives are at stake. So what are we looking at? This is how we operate mostly as human beings. And you can understand it. Don't rock the boat. And shit.
Well, I have to say, I can't wait for them to read the chapter in your book, To Be an Activist, because it'll give them encouragement to know that they are actually on the right side of history. And also the idea of actually the healing experience of the bush. Say something about that.
I've never worked with individuals in the bush with a specific task of discovering the healing qualities of wildness. Why? Because for some people it's far too unfamiliar. It's not for them. One-off visits will be the one and only time they ever go into wild areas. But for others it can be absolutely life-changing. And this is where, I mean, I speak for myself. I was fortunate enough as a young boy to have grown up with the bush on my doorstep. Okay, you speak to a lot of young people today, and I'm not going to mention his name, but very, very well-known South African sportsman who told me just this last week. He said, "I grew up in townships there, and I grew up to be scared of everything, for everything from dogs and any kind of animal that I know nothing about, and to ask him to ask me to go and camp, I'd be terrified."
Yeah.
Okay, now what are we going to do? We're going to take this person on the wilderness trail and just turn things around? Well, the answer might well be yes, but not now. Let's just prepare you for this in a way that I can just say to you that your safety is guaranteed only up to a point. So the healing effect of wilderness, wow. You see, you're speaking to the converted. And what I do know, and as I've said this before, is that for me, and then I'm just being very, very personal here, that the wilderness is my church. You know, it's a church with no dogma. You know, you go into it with no expectations. It's the law of the wild. You expect anything. You expect anything and you assume nothing. Don't think I've been along this game trail yesterday and therefore I know where this is going to lead or what's going to happen. You don't know. And it's just keeping those kind of options open. And maybe a way of ending this is to recognize the teachings of the wild in terms of understanding the laws of the wild. That is one law, just one of the laws. Expect anything and assume nothing. That's like asking me, what do you think the future of the world is? In terms of where are we going now? With the future of wildlife and just what is happening? Well, I think, first of all, there's an overriding, a very keen sense of it's too late. We're stuffed. You know, we are going to go extinct, as various living forms do. There's a part of me which says, well, hang on a second. Does that mean you're going to give up? And you'll... Well, clearly, my mind says, no, I'm not going to give up. I will focus on that, on the concept of hope versus optimism. Yeah? And hope is about doing the right thing. But I'll also focus on that law of the wild. Expect anything and assume nothing. You just carry on doing what you believe to be the right thing and be amazed. You know, don't expect it to work out, but it might. You know, so I think that is how I live. And what does it do? It actually takes you to the edge. You know, it takes you to the edge where you are awake and you're alert and you're aware of what's going on around you.
So I would like to ask at a very practical level about leading a holistic life. How could you recommend to somebody, a simple person, I regard myself as such, to, after many years possibly of not being conscious of a holistic life, to suddenly say one day, I want to somehow, this day, be conscious of what's around me, and I want to try and live a holistic day.
All right. I'm going to ask you to reconsider the word holistic.
Yeah.
Why? Because it has been so stretched and beaten up and misunderstood. You're going to lead a biospheric life.
Pardon?
Biospheric life.
No.
We're right. We're in the biosphere.
Right.
And the biosphere is everything that maintains and is responsible for biological life on our planet. All right.
Yeah.
So we are a biological species to begin with. We are also a social species. We are also an intellectual species. And I'd like to think ultimately an ecological species. Okay. But first and foremost, let's not forget our roots. What keeps us alive in the first place, even to ask the question which you asked, or for me to respond in the way that I'm doing, that we are creatures of the biosphere. And a good example of that is just take a breath, take a deep breath. What on earth are you breathing in? You're breathing in the products of the elements from the sky, from the trees, from... And what are you giving out? All right. That is a meditation in its own right. And it is a meditation on insights into the concept of belonging. This is where I belong. These are the species, the life forms, which allow me to exist. And without them, I am nothing. And what can I give back? With gratitude, with respect, with a sense of reciprocity. Godfathers, we look at the elements that are in the sky, in this atmosphere, and we pay so little attention to it. It's massive, the sky, you know. But we're always looking around there. And carbon dioxide. Too much carbon dioxide will kill you. Too little carbon dioxide will kill you as well. Oxygen. Too much oxygen is going to kill you. Too little is going to kill you. It's just, you know, let's look at these paradoxes. Breathe. Breathe with gratitude.
Well, no conversation with Ian McCallum would be complete without a recital of some of his extraordinary poetry. Ian, over to you.
Right.
Tell us about this poem and what stirred you to do it.
Okay, this poem is called An Unfamiliar Silence. It has its roots in the first morning of the COVID-19 lockdown. I woke up to a brilliantly still morning. The surface of the lake in front of my home was like a silk-covered pond. However, it was the silence that struck me. I'd never felt a silence like this before. Something was happening. The world would not be the same again. An unfamiliar silence. It was the stillness, the unfamiliar silence that woke me. Not the silence of night or grief or the quiet emptiness of the quayside, for the ship, long gone, was out of sight. No, this was the silence of a thief fingering her way into my sleep. I stirred. Was that a breeze? Or was it the deep earth sigh of relief? Yes. Yes. Now awake, I heard the silence of the promise of an unborn child, felt the stillness of an unruffled lake, a virgin slate upon which the fate of that child lay in waiting. A new world was waiting. Could this be the silence of the second, or third, or perhaps the final coming?